The highway outside Clarksville, Tennessee stretched long and flat in the late afternoon sun, the kind of road that seemed to go nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Cole Mercer had been riding it for 20 years. Not because it led somewhere worth going, but because moving felt better than standing still. Standing still meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant going back to the night everything ended. He was 52 years old. His face showed every one of those years carved by wind and weather, and something harder than either. The leather vest on his back bore the Hells Angels patch he had earned at 34 2 years after the accident, 6 months after he walked out of Riverbend Correctional and found that the world had continued without him in the way the world always continues indifferently and without apology. He had joined the Memphis chapter because they asked no questions about the past and expected nothing from the future except that you ride when called and stand when standing was required. It was a kind of life, not a good one, but a kind. The Harley beneath him rumbled like a living thing vibrating through his boots and up through his spine. He had bought this particular bike 11 years ago secondhand from a man in Nashville who needed the money more than the ride. Cole had rebuilt every inch of it himself alone in a rented garage, working through nights when sleep refused to come, which was most nights. The sun was dropping toward the tree line, turning the sky the color of an old bruised purple and orange and fading gold. Cole rode without a destination the way he always did on afternoons like this. He would ride until the thought quieted, until the memory that lived just behind his eyes retreated back into the darkness where it belonged. It never left completely, but sometimes if the road was long enough and the engine loud enough, it moved far enough back that he could breathe. 20 years ago, Cole Mercer had been a different man. Younger, obviously, louder, more careless in the way that men are careless when they still believe the world will absorb the damage they cause. He had a wife named Patricia who laughed easily and loved him more than he probably deserved. He had a daughter named Katie who was 5 years old and had brown eyes so deep and warm they looked like something found at the bottom of a river. Katie collected small things, buttons, feathers, smooth stones from the creek bed behind their house. She kept them in a shoebox under her bed and showed them to Cole on Sunday mornings, like a curator presenting treasures to a museum visitor. He had driven drunk. That was the plain fact of it, stripped of excuses and explanations and the long silence that had followed. A July evening, a party at a friend's house. Too many beers counted wrong. He had told himself he was fine. Men who are not fine almost always tell themselves they are. The truck that crossed the center line was not entirely his fault, the police report had noted. Not entirely. But he had no business being on that road in that condition, and when the impact came, Patricia died on the way to the hospital, and Katie died an hour later, while Cole sat in a waiting room with a cut above his eye and a sobriety that had arrived 20 minutes too late to matter. He served 3 years. The sentence felt like a joke, like paying $1 for something that had cost everything. When he came out, there was nothing to come out to. The house was sold. The friends had drifted. His own family, what remained of it, did not know how to look at him. He had joined the Hells Angels chapter in Memphis 6 months after his release, not because he believed in anything they stood for, but because they asked no questions about the past and expected nothing from the future. He had not been sober the night of the accident. He had been sober every night since. That was the one rule he kept, absolutely the one way he drew a line between the man who had killed his family and the man he forced himself to be afterward. It was not redemption. He did not believe in redemption. It was just the minimum, the floor below which he refused to fall. He rode. The neighborhoods on the eastern edge of Clarksville were modest and aging, the kind of streets where houses needed painting and trucks sat in driveways with one tire flat. Cole was not particularly watching his surroundings. He rarely did on these rides. He was watching the road ahead, the way he always watched the road ahead, because the road ahead was the only place he allowed his eyes to rest. That was why he almost missed her. She was sitting on the curb in front of a 2-story house with a sagging front porch. A little girl in a faded blue dress that was clearly too large for her small frame. 5 years old, maybe. No more than 6. She was drawing patterns in the dirt with a stick, her head bent, her dark hair falling forward across her face. There was nothing dramatic about the way she sat there. She was just a child sitting alone on a sidewalk in the late afternoon. But something about the absolute stillness of her, the particular quality of her aloneness, caught at something in Cole's chest as he rode past. He did not slow down. He told himself there was nothing wrong with a child sitting outside on a warm afternoon. Kids sat outside. That was normal. That was what kids did. He kept riding, but the image stayed with him the way certain images do, attaching themselves to the mind with small hooks. The too large dress, the absolute concentration on the stick, moving through the dirt as if drawing those patterns in the earth was the most important work in the world. The way she had not looked up as he rode past, as if she had long since stopped expecting anyone riding by to stop. Cole was a block away when the black van turned onto the street. He noticed it the way he noticed most vehicles, peripherally, without intent. It was moving slowly the way vehicles move when a driver is looking for a specific address. The windows were tinted dark. It stopped at the curb in front of the house where the little girl was sitting. Cole slowed without thinking about it. The side door of the van opened fast. A man in a baseball cap came out, moving quickly the way people move when they need to accomplish something before anyone has time to react. He crossed the sidewalk in 3 steps. The little girl looked up, her mouth open, and then the man's hands were on her arms and she was off the ground and being pulled toward the van, and the sound that should have been a scream died somewhere in her throat before it could become real. Cole's hand hit the brake. In the half second before the van door slammed shut, the little girl turned her head. The motion was instinctive, the way any creature looks for help when help is the only remaining hope. Her eyes swept the street and found Cole's face across the distance between them. Brown eyes, deep and wide and filled with a terror so pure it had no name. Brown eyes exactly like Katie's. The van door slammed. The tires screamed against the pavement. Cole sat on his idling Harley and watched the van accelerate away from him. For a moment, he did not move. The street was empty again except for him and the lengthening shadows and the stick the little girl had left lying in the dirt at the edge of the curb. He looked at that stick for what felt like a long time. Then he looked at the direction the van had gone. He told himself it was not his business. He told himself there were people whose job it was to handle things like this, people with radios and authority and the legal right to intervene in situations that were none of Cole Mercer's concern. He told himself he was a convicted felon, a Hell's Angel, a man with no standing and no credibility and no right to insert himself into anything involving a child. He told himself all of this in the time it took to ride 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks, the van disappearing around a corner ahead of him while he rode straight, moving away from it, moving toward the part of the afternoon that was just riding and not thinking and not remembering. He stopped at a red light on the corner of Maple and Henderson. A truck idled next to him. A woman in a station wagon sat behind him, probably thinking about dinner, probably thinking about ordinary things the way ordinary people did. Cole looked at his hands on the handlebars. He was 32 years old the night his daughter died. He had been 10 minutes from the hospital when they called his cell phone to tell him she was gone. 10 minutes. He had been driving the speed limit, the terrible sobriety of aftermath, having replaced everything else, and he had still arrived 10 minutes too late to hold her hand while she left. He had never forgiven himself for those 10 minutes, for the beers that made him slow, for the party that made him stay, for every casual decision that added up to a little girl dying alone in a hospital room waiting for her father. The light turned green. Cole did not move. The truck next to him pulled away. The woman in the station wagon behind him tapped her horn once politely. Cole sat still with the engine running beneath him and the evening air cooling around him and those brown eyes somewhere inside his skull refusing to leave. He was not a hero. He had never been a hero. The Hell's Angels patch on his back was not a symbol of heroism. It was a symbol of belonging to something, because belonging to nothing had turned out to be unsurvivable. He had no training, no plan, no authority. He had a hunting knife in his boot and a cell phone that he used roughly 4 times a week and a motorcycle that could go very fast on open road. He thought about the stick lying in the dirt. He thought about the shoebox under Katie's bed, the buttons and feathers and smooth stones, the Sunday morning presentations in her serious 5-year-old voice, the way she had looked at him when she showed him these things, like he was the most important audience in the world. He thought about 10 minutes. The car behind him honked again, longer this time. Cole made a U-turn. He drove the turn hard and fast, ignoring the horn and the shouted word from the driver behind him, and pushed the Harley up through the gears in the direction the van had gone. His jaw was set and his eyes were steady, and the feeling moving through him was not heroism and not courage. It was older and simpler than either of those things. It was the specific, unbearable weight of a man who has already failed to protect one little girl with brown eyes and has no intention of failing again. He picked up the van 2 blocks ahead, catching the tail end of it as it turned east toward the industrial district. He throttled back, keeping 3 cars between them, far enough to avoid being seen, but close enough not to lose the vehicle in traffic. He rode with his eyes locked on the back of the van, matching its speed, thinking forward. Traffic thinned as they moved east through town, the commercial strips giving way to older neighborhoods, and then to the outskirts where the road narrowed, and the trees thickened, and the houses grew farther apart. Cole let the distance between himself and the van grow. Out here, a single motorcycle on an empty road was visible for a long way in both directions. He needed to be careful. The van turned onto a 2-lane county road heading south. Cole followed at a distance, using the curves in the road to keep the van intermittently in sight without getting close enough to be noticed. He reached into a saddlebag at a stop sign and found the small pair of binoculars he kept for mountain rides, bringing them up long enough to confirm the van's plate number before tucking them away. The land out here was old Tennessee farmland, stretches of open field broken by woodlots and creek beds, and the occasional weathered structure that had been standing since before the interstate was built. The road was poorly maintained, pocked with frost heaves and patched with mismatched asphalt. The van moved steadily, not hurrying, not hesitating, the way a vehicle moves when the driver knows exactly where he is going. Cole had been a mechanic before the accident. He had worked in a shop off Union Avenue for 6 years, and the work had taught him patience of a particular kind, the patience of a man who understands that systems have logic, and that if you follow the logic far enough, it will lead you to the source of the problem. He applied that patience now. He would follow. He would find out where they were taking her. What happened after that would depend on what he found when he got there. The van slowed ahead, then turned onto a dirt road that disappeared into a stand of trees. Cole pulled to the shoulder and cut his engine, watching through the binoculars as the van moved down the dirt track and stopped in the yard of an old farmhouse, sitting in a clearing about half a mile back from the main road. He watched until the van doors opened and 2 figures got out, one carrying a small shape that Cole understood was the little girl. The farmhouse swallowed them. A light came on inside. Cole sat on the shoulder of the county road for a long moment. Evening was settling in around him, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky, the air cooling quickly the way it does in Tennessee when the sun goes down. He was not going to call the police, not yet. He had turned that option over during the ride and found it wanting. He would call and describe a van and give a plate number, and then what? They might find the farmhouse. They might not find it for hours. They might arrive with sirens and lights and the kind of chaos that ends badly for small children caught in the middle of things they did not cause. He wanted to see what he was dealing with first. He wheeled the Harley off the road and into a gap in the tree line, leaning it against a trunk and pulling dead branches over it until it was reasonably hidden from the road. He took his hunting knife from his boot and checked it by habit. He took the small flashlight from his saddlebag and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he started walking through the trees toward the farmhouse, moving parallel to the dirt track, keeping the tree line between himself and the open yard. The farmhouse was older than it had looked from the road. Up close, the weathered siding and sagging porch eaves told a story of years of deferred maintenance of a place that had once been cared for and had gradually stopped being cared for the way places do when the people inside them run out of energy for things beyond survival. But the structure was solid. The lights in the downstairs windows were warm. Someone had planted a small garden at the south side of the house, and though it was overgrown and unpruned, it had been planted by someone who meant to stay. Cole positioned himself behind a thick oak at the edge of the tree line, close enough to see clearly, far enough back that the shadows covered him completely. He settled in to watch. Through the kitchen window, he could see movement. Two adults, a man and a woman, moving in the contained choreography of people sharing a small domestic space. The man was average height and build, somewhere in his mid-40s, his shoulders carrying the particular slump of the person who had been tired for a long time. He stood at the stove with his back to the window. The woman was a few years younger, dark-haired, her movements deliberate and careful in the way that people are careful when they are concentrating hard on seeming normal. Then he saw the little girl. She was sitting at the kitchen table. The woman was sitting beside her. Between them on the table was a sheet of paper and a box of crayons, the cheap kind, the kind that came in a pack of 16 with a sharpener built into the box. The woman was helping the little girl with something on the paper, her voice too low to hear through the glass, but her body language entirely clear. She was being gentle. She was being patient. She was leaning in, slightly pointing at something on the paper, and the little girl was leaning in too, following the woman's finger with her eyes. Cole watched for a long time without moving. This was not what he had expected to find. He had expected fear, restraints, cruelty in some visible form, the things that made the word kidnapping mean what it meant. He had expected a child in distress, in danger in the hands of people whose intentions were clearly and obviously terrible. He had expected a situation with a clear architecture of harm on one side and innocence on the other. What he saw instead was a woman helping a little girl color a picture. What he heard when the window shifted slightly in the evening breeze and a crack of sound came through was a voice saying something about a sun and a crayon, the kind of voice a person uses when they are trying very hard to comfort something small and frightened. Cole's hand, which had been resting near the knife in his boot, slowly relaxed. He did not understand what he was seeing, but he understood that storming through the back door with a hunting knife was not the right response to it. Not yet. He would wait. He would watch. He had learned in many years of living a life that required certain kinds of patience that the picture always got clearer if you gave it enough time. The man brought 3 bowls to the table. The woman tucked a napkin into the collar of the little girl's shirt. They bowed their heads. Grace. The man said something and the woman said something, and the little girl nodded, and then they all ate. The little girl swung her legs under the chair. She ate carefully, taking small spoonfuls, watching the 2 adults between bites with eyes that were measuring and alert. Smart kid, Cole thought. Even now, even in a situation that would have leveled a grown adult, she was watching. She was reading the room. She was figuring out the rules. After dinner, he watched the woman take the little girl to the bathroom, heard the sound of water running, saw the warm light under the door. The man stood alone in the kitchen, and then his shoulders began to shake. He was crying, not loudly, not theatrically. Just a man standing alone in his kitchen at night, crying in the particular silent way that people cry when they have been holding something for too long and can no longer hold it. Cole had cried like that exactly once the night after Katie's funeral. Alone in the parking lot of a motel in Murfreesboro, sitting against the rear tire of a borrowed truck, crying without sound, because making sound would have meant admitting out loud that it was real. He watched the man in the kitchen and felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. An hour passed. The lights moved through the house in a pattern that Cole tracked and mapped. The bathroom, a small bedroom at the end of the hall, warm light visible through thin curtains, the adults' room light burning longer. Cole circled the house, slowly staying in shadow, checking the angles, finding the windows that gave him the best views of the interior. Through the bedroom window, he could see a twin bed and a small shape in it, a little girl sleeping with something clutched in both arms. Cole stood at that window for longer than he intended. She was sleeping on her back with her head tilted slightly to one side, the way small children sleep with a completeness of surrender that adults never quite achieve. In her arms was a stuffed animal of some kind, worn and soft, the kind of toy that has been loved hard and long. Her face in sleep was peaceful in a way it had not been on the sidewalk that afternoon or in that terrible half-second in the van doorway. Whatever fear had driven her for the rest of the day had receded in sleep, leaving behind just a child's face, open and unguarded and very young. Cole stood in the dark outside the window and thought about what he was doing. He could break the lock and carry her out. Right now, she would wake up terrified, and he was a stranger, but he could get her to the road before the adults heard anything, and from there he could call the police from a distance and wait for them to arrive. The farmhouse was isolated enough that there was no obvious way for the couple to stop him. He was bigger than the man, likely stronger, certainly more accustomed to situations that required physicality. He stood at the window and he thought about this option. And then, without planning to, he thought about the look on the woman's face when the little girl had leaned in to look at the drawing. He thought about the man crying alone in the kitchen. He thought about the voice through the cracked window, the one that had been talking about a sun and a crayon, the patience in it, the care in it. He thought about the wrong kind of solution to a complicated problem. Cole backed away from the window and moved to the back of the house, lowering himself to sit with his back against the rear wall in the deep shadow where no light from the windows reached. He could hear the sounds of the house settling around him, the creak of old wood, the distant hum of a refrigerator, the faint sound of what might have been a television somewhere inside. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he decided what to do about it. The police were always an option. That door did not close. But once he opened it, he could not control what came through it. And something about what he had seen through the kitchen window made him want to understand the full picture before he handed it over to people who would see only the edges of it. He would stay through the night. He would listen. In the morning, he would make a decision. Earlier in the evening, before settling against the back wall, Cole had done something practical. He had reached down and disconnected a spark plug wire on the Harley enough to make the engine run rough without making it actually unrideable. A mechanical problem that could be demonstrated. A reason to stop. A reason to stay long enough to see what he needed to see. He had learned in many years of navigating situations that required more than brute force that the best entry was always the one that appeared accidental. He sat in the dark behind the farmhouse with the Tennessee night gathering around him. The stars thick and cold above the tree line, the sounds of the countryside replacing the sounds of the city. An owl called from somewhere in the woodlot to the west. A dog barked in the far distance and then went quiet. Cole sat with his back against the weathered siding and his eyes open and his mind turning the problem over, slowly looking for the shape of it. The way he had once turned over engines to find the fault in the system. Somewhere inside the house, the last light went out. Darkness settled completely over the farmhouse, in the yard, in the fields beyond. Cole remained where he was, still and patient and awake, listening to the old building breathe around him. He thought about what he had heard through the kitchen window earlier in the evening. A fragment of conversation between the couple that had drifted out through the cracked glass. The man's voice low and heavy. The words had come in pieces incomplete, but the shape of them had been clear enough. Something about the wrong girl. Something about nobody looking for her. The woman's voice quieter, harder to catch. But the tone had been unmistakable. Not the tone of people celebrating a successful crime. The tone of people who had done something they had not entirely meant to do and were beginning to understand the weight of it. Cole filed this away and waited. After a while, he took his wallet from his jacket and opened it in the darkness, finding the small photograph by feel alone, the plastic sleeve worn smooth by years of this same gesture. He did not need to see the picture. He knew it perfectly. Katie, at 4 years old, a year before she died, standing in front of a cherry tree in full bloom in the backyard of the house on Sycamore Street, laughing at something just off camera, her arms spread wide. He held the wallet in both hands and sat very still. He had no plan. He had a location, a situation he did not fully understand, A child he could not identify beyond the fact of her 5 years and her brown eyes and the particular quality of her aloneness on that sidewalk. He had a hunting knife and a flashlight and 52 years of making decisions in the dark and living with the consequences. He thought whatever these people are, whatever they have done, and whatever they intend, this child is not safe until she is somewhere that is genuinely safe. Not just safe from fear, safe from the kind of forgetting that leaves a little girl drawing patterns in dirt on a sidewalk because there is nothing else for her to do and no one coming to tell her to come inside. He thought you already know you are not leaving. He had known it, he supposed, from the moment he made the U-turn. A faint sound drifted through the bedroom window above him, too quiet to be words, but unmistakably a voice. The woman's voice, low and rhythmic. A lullaby, maybe, or something like one. Cole closed his wallet carefully and slid it back into his jacket pocket. He tilted his head back against the siding and looked up at the sky through the gap between the house and the tree line at the stars burning cold and certain above the dark Tennessee countryside. Whatever had brought him here, it was not done with him yet. Inside the farmhouse, the last sound faded. The night went completely quiet. Cole sat in the dark and waited the way he had always waited, the way men wait, when they understand that patience is not the absence of action, but the preparation for it, the stillness before the thing that cannot be taken back. He reached down and touched the handle of the knife in his boot, not to use it, just to feel it there, the small, solid certainty of it. Then he put his hands in his lap and let his eyes rest on the dark fields beyond the yard, and began carefully and methodically to think about what came next. He had been sitting for perhaps 3 hours the night deep in the farmhouse entirely dark when he decided he needed to hear more than the fragments that had reached him through the kitchen window. He needed the full picture. He rose, moving silently from his position against the back wall, and made his way around to the kitchen window. The crack in the frame was still there, the same gap that had let sound through earlier. Cole settled below the sill and listened. For a long time there was nothing. Then footsteps from the back of the house, slow and reluctant, the sound of a person who could not sleep. The kitchen light came on muted, possibly a single lamp rather than the overhead fixture. Cole raised himself just enough to see. The man was sitting at the kitchen table alone, his hands flat on the surface, his head bowed. He was not crying this time. He was past crying. He had the look of a man who had arrived at the bottom of something and was sitting there trying to take inventory of what remained. The woman appeared a few minutes later. She sat across from him without speaking. They looked at each other for a moment and then both looked at the table. "She called you that again tonight," the man said. His voice was quiet and rough. "When I said goodnight, she called you mommy." The woman did not respond for a moment. "I know," she said. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's 5 years old and she's scared and she's attaching to whoever is here. I know that too." Another silence. Cole held very still. "We got the wrong girl, Nora." The man's voice dropped to nearly nothing. "I checked the address again. The Henderson house is on the next street over. The one with the iron fence. We were a full block off." "I know." "So we took a child who has nothing. No family looking for her, no one who filed a report." He stopped. "I've been checking the news since we got here. Nothing. No Amber Alert, no press conference. Nobody is looking for her." "Then she's better off here than wherever she came from," the woman said. Her voice was very quiet but very certain. "That is not how this works, Nora. I'm not talking about how it works. I'm talking about what's true." The man stood up and walked to the window, and Cole pressed himself flat against the wall, motionless. The man stood with his back to the glass, facing the dark kitchen. "She's not Amy," he said. "No matter how much it feels like she could be." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. The woman made a sound that was not quite a word. "I know she's not Amy," she said. Her voice had changed, gone thinner and more fragile. "I know that every second of every minute. But she's here, and she's real, and she needed someone to give her dinner and put her to bed. And I did that. I did that, and it felt like she stopped, started again. It felt like the first time in 8 months I was still a mother. The man turned from the window. Cole could hear him sit back down. "We can't keep her," he said. "I know." "Then what are we doing?" Neither of them answered that question. The lamp in the kitchen went off after a while, and the footsteps retreated back down the hallway, and the house went quiet again. Cole remained against the wall in the dark, not moving, processing what he had heard. 8 months. A child named Amy. The wrong address. Nobody looking for the girl they had taken. The pieces assembled themselves slowly into a picture that was more complicated than the one Cole had been carrying since the sidewalk on Maple Street. He had followed a kidnapping. That was still true. A child had been taken by force against her will by people who had no right to take her. That was also still true, but the people who had taken her had lost a daughter 8 months ago, had gone to take a wealthy child for ransom, gotten the wrong address, and ended up with a child from the foster system that nobody appeared to be searching for. And in the 8 hours since something had shifted in this house, the woman had made the girl dinner and helped her color and put her to bed with what looked from every angle Cole had observed it like genuine care. None of this changed what had happened on the sidewalk, but it changed what Cole needed to understand before he decided what to do about it. He went back to his position against the rear wall and sat down and let the night move around him, and he did not arrive at any easy conclusions, and that was the honest truth of where things stood when the sky began to lighten in the east and the birds started their first tentative notes, and the farmhouse remained quiet around its sleeping occupants. The morning came in slowly over the eastern fields, gray first and then gold. The kind of Tennessee dawn that looked like a promise being made before anyone was awake to hear it. Cole had not slept. He had sat through the full dark of the night with his back against the farmhouse wall, moving once to circle the property and confirm the exits, moving again to retrieve a granola bar from his jacket pocket, and otherwise remaining still in the way that men remain still when stillness is the only useful thing available to them. He heard the house wake up before he saw any light change inside it. The creak of a floorboard, the sound of a faucet running, then the smell of coffee, faint and domestic, drifting through the kitchen window that had been cracked open overnight to let in the cool air. Cole eased himself to his feet, his joints protesting the hours on the ground, and moved carefully to the corner of the house where he could see both the back door and the kitchen window without being visible from either. Through the window, he watched Desmond Whitfield shuffle into the kitchen alone, rubbing sleep from his face with both hands. The man looked worse in the morning light than he had the night before. The lines around his eyes had deepened overnight, or perhaps Cole was simply seeing them more clearly now, without the softening effect of distance and dim window light. Desmond filled a kettle and set it on the stove, and then stood at the window with his hands braced on the counter, staring out at the yard with the look of a man who was not seeing the yard at all, but something much farther away and much harder to look at. He stood like that for a long time. The kettle whistled. Desmond moved quickly to silence it the way people do when they are conscious of sleeping children in the house. He poured 2 mugs and dropped tea bags into both of them, and then Nora appeared in the doorway in a faded bathrobe, her dark hair loose around her face, her eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of a person who had slept, but not rested. Desmond handed her a mug without speaking. She took it, and their fingers touched briefly, and something passed between them. In that touch, some long familiarity, some acknowledgement of shared weight that words had stopped being adequate for. They sat at the kitchen table, and Nora wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the surface of the tea, and Desmond looked at the table, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. Then a small voice came from down the hall. "Mommy." The word hit Nora like a physical thing. Cole saw it from the window, the way her whole body responded to the sound, a sharp intake of breath, and then a deliberate settling, the way a person steadies themselves before walking into something they are not sure they can survive. She set down her mug and stood, and her face in the half second before she arranged it into something softer showed everything. The grief and the hunger and the terrible complexity of what she was feeling when a child who was not hers called her by a name that belonged to someone who was gone. "Coming, sweetheart," she called back. She disappeared down the hallway. Desmond sat alone at the table and Cole watched him lower his head into his hands and hold it there, the posture of a man carrying something he cannot set down and cannot carry much longer. Cole made his decision. He walked back through the trees to the dirt road and followed it on foot to the county road, then walked the shoulder north a quarter mile to where the Harley was hidden in the tree line. He mounted the bike and started the engine, which ran rough the way it was supposed to run rough, and rode back toward Clarksville, not toward the highway, but toward the main street, toward the modest commercial district that served this part of the county. He needed coffee. He needed to think on a full stomach. And he needed to approach the farmhouse differently than he had been approaching it. Storming in was wrong. He had established that through the night. But watching from outside was also insufficient. He could not protect the girl from the yard. He could not understand the full situation from behind a window. Whatever he was going to do about Lily Brooks, and he was going to do something, he needed to be inside that conversation, not outside it. He needed a reason to be there that would hold up to scrutiny long enough to let him figure out what kind of people Desmond and Nora Whitfield actually were and what they actually intended. The spark plug wire was still disconnected. The Harley would run rough enough to justify stopping. Cole knew how to play a man who needed help on the road. He had needed actual help on the road enough times over the years that the performance required almost no acting at all. He found the diner on the main street of Clarksville without difficulty. It was the kind of place that announced itself honestly. A low brick building with a hand-painted sign and a gravel lot with 4 trucks in it at 7 in the morning, which in Cole's experience was the reliable indicator of food worth eating. He parked and went inside and took a corner booth that gave him a view of the door. The woman who brought his coffee was in her mid-60s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been pretty once and had become something better with age, more settled, more knowing. Her name tag said Dorothy, but she introduced herself as Dot, and she poured his coffee and looked at him with the direct, appraising gaze of a woman who had been reading men across a counter for 40 years and had very few illusions left about what she was reading. "Passing through," she asked. "Not sure yet," Cole said. Dot nodded as if this were a perfectly satisfactory answer and brought him eggs and toast without being asked, apparently having made her own assessment of what he needed. He ate and drank his coffee and looked out the window at the empty street and let his mind work through the problem the way he had learned to work through problems systematically from the outside edges inward. He knew the child had been taken by force. He knew the child was not being visibly harmed. He knew the couple who took her had been crying in separate rooms of the house. He knew the child had called the woman mommy, voluntarily, without coercion. He knew no one appeared to be looking for the child, or at least not loudly. That last fact was the one he kept returning to. He had checked his phone during the night, scrolling through local news alerts looking for any mention of a missing child in Clarksville or the surrounding county. There had been nothing. No Amber Alert, no police press conference, no report of a child matching the description of the girl he had seen taken off the sidewalk on Maple Street. He understood why, even if it sat badly. The girl had come from a foster home, a house where, from the one brief glimpse Cole had of it, the adults were occupied with their own concerns, and a child sitting alone on the curb in the late afternoon was unremarkable enough not to require explanation. Whether a report had been filed at all, whether anyone in that house had even noticed the girl was gone by the time darkness fell, Cole could not say with certainty. What he could say was that the silence of the news in the hours since the abduction suggested that the machinery of official concern had not yet been activated on her behalf, which told him something about the machinery and something about her. He thought about the foster home. The third one this year he had heard from the kitchen window conversation. He thought about the girl sitting alone on the curb while adults were occupied with other things inside. He ate his eggs and drank his coffee, and did not arrive at any comfortable conclusions. When Dot refilled his cup, she paused rather than moving on the way people pause when they have decided to say something they have not entirely committed to saying yet. "You've got something on your mind," she said. "Not a question." "Always do," Cole said. "Something heavier than usual." She set the coffee pot down on the table and sat across from him in the easy proprietorial way of a woman who owned the booth as much as he was borrowing it. "A man your age riding alone with eyes like that, you're not lost on the road." Cole looked at her. "What kind of eyes?" "The kind that have been looking for something for a long time," Dot said simply. "And maybe just found it, which is sometimes harder than the looking." He almost told her. He was surprised by how close he came to it, sitting in that corner booth with the morning sun coming through the window and the smell of coffee and toast and the particular quality of attention Dot Reeves brought to a conversation. He had not talked to anyone really talked in longer than he could clearly remember. The Hells Angels were brothers in the specific way that men who ride together are brothers, present in crisis, reliable in a fight, but not built for the kind of conversation where you admitted that you were frightened and uncertain and didn't know what the right thing was. He did not tell her everything, but he told her enough. He told her there was a child in a situation that needed careful handling and that he was trying to figure out how to handle it without making things worse. He told her he was looking for someone who understood family law, someone who could give him a picture of what the options actually were before he committed to any particular course. Dot listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached into the pocket of her apron and produced a business card worn at the corners. "My nephew," she said, sliding it across the table. "He handles family cases. Been doing it for 15 years. He owes me more favors than I care to count." Cole picked up the card and looked at it. "Whatever you're trying to do," Dot said, standing and retrieving the coffee pot, "make sure it starts with understanding what the child needs, not what the law needs, not what makes the cleanest story, what she needs." She went back to the counter without waiting for a response. Cole sat for another few minutes, turning the business card over in his fingers. Then he tucked it into his wallet behind the photograph of Katie and left enough cash on the table to cover the meal twice over. He went out to the Harley. The engine caught and ran rough the way it was supposed to, and he rode back toward the farmhouse with the morning air moving over him and the plan taking shape in his mind with the slow, deliberate clarity of something assembled piece by piece from available material. He turned onto the dirt road at 8:30 in the morning and rode it slow, letting the sound of the engine carry ahead of him. He stopped in the open yard in full view of the front of the house and sat on the idling bike and waited. The curtain in the front window moved. He waited. The front door opened and Desmond Whitfield stepped onto the porch. He was carrying a mug of coffee in one hand and holding the other slightly back and away from his body, the posture of a man who wanted his hands accessible without wanting to look like that was what he wanted. His eyes moved over Cole with the quick, thorough assessment of someone who had learned to be cautious about strangers. "Help you," Desmond said. His voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him something. "Hope so," Cole said. He kept his own voice easy, the mild, slightly rueful tone of a man with a mechanical problem, and nowhere in particular to be. "Bike's been giving me trouble since yesterday. Thought I had it sorted, but she's running rough again." He gestured at the engine. "Mind if I pull over and take a look before I try the highway?" Desmond studied him. Cole sat still on the bike and let himself be studied. He was aware of how he looked. 52 years old face like worked leather, Hells Angels patches on his vest. He was aware that these things were working against him, and he was aware that there was nothing to do about them except let the moment breathe long enough to give the other man time to arrive at his own conclusion. From inside the house came the sound of small feet moving fast on a hardwood floor. The screen door burst open ahead of Nora's outstretched arm, and a little girl in pajamas, covered in small yellow stars, came onto the porch at a full run and stopped at the top step with her hands on the railing and her eyes locked on the motorcycle with an expression of undiluted wonder. "Is that yours?" she said. Cole looked at her. This was the first time he had seen her face in full daylight, and he felt the impact of it somewhere in his sternum, a blow that had nothing to do with the physical. She was 5 years old and small for her age, with dark hair that someone had recently combed and eyes that were in daylight exactly as brown and exactly as deep as they had been in that terrible half-second in the van doorway. She was looking at the motorcycle the way children look at things they have no category for yet, with a pure and total attention that adults spend most of their lives trying to recover. "It is," Cole said. "It's really big," she said seriously. "It is," he agreed. She looked at him, then shifting her gaze from the motorcycle to his face with the same total attention, the same lack of self-consciousness. Children looked at you like that, Cole had forgotten. Straight on, measuring you by criteria that had nothing to do with the things adults measured each other by. "You have pictures on your coat," she said, pointing at his vest. "I do." "What are they for?" "They show what club I belong to," Cole said. "Like a team." She considered this information with apparent seriousness. Nora had come to stand at the door, her hand resting on the frame, watching the interaction without intervening. Desmond had not moved from his position at the edge of the porch. "You can look at the bike if you want," Cole said. "If it's okay." He looked up at Desmond when he said the last part. Desmond's jaw tightened. Then he looked at the little girl on the top step, at the quality of wanting on her face, and something in him shifted the way things shift in men when children ask for something simple and harmless, and there is no good reason to say no. "Stay on the porch," Desmond said to her. She nodded without taking her eyes off the motorcycle. Cole dismounted and began to open the access panel on the engine, moving with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of a man who knows what he is doing. After a moment, Desmond came down the porch steps. He stood at a reasonable distance and watched Cole work the way men do when their mechanical curiosity overrides their caution. "What year?" Desmond asked, nodding at the bike. 89, Cole said. "Rebuilt her myself." Desmond looked at the engine with involuntary respect. All of it. Every piece. "I had a friend with a shovel head back in the 90s. Always something wrong with it." "That's the experience if you don't know what you're doing," Cole said. "Once you understand the system, it's just maintenance." He held out a component without looking up. "Mind holding this?" Desmond took it. They worked in a silence that was less hostile than the silence that had preceded, the specific silence of two men occupied with the mechanical problem, which was a silence Cole had always found easier than most other kinds. "You from around here?" Desmond asked after a while. "Memphis originally, just riding." "Long way from home for just riding." "That's the idea," Cole said. Desmond handed back the component when Cole reached for it, anticipating the need a half-second before Cole had to ask. The instinct of a man who had worked with his hands alongside other men. "You know your way around an engine," Cole said. "Had to learn young." Desmond's voice shifted slightly, losing some of its wariness in the familiarity of the subject. "Dad left when I was 8. Mom worked 2 jobs. Couldn't afford to pay anyone to fix things." Cole nodded. "Makes you self-sufficient." "Or stubborn," Desmond said. And then unexpectedly, almost against his will, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something in the direction of one. Nora appeared at the porch rail above them. "Coffee," she said. "I have a fresh pot." Cole looked up. She was watching him with careful eyes, measuring something, and he understood that she was not offering coffee because she was a naturally hospitable person in this moment, but because the little girl was on the porch and Desmond was in the yard, and something about the dynamic between them had already moved past the point where asking him to leave could be done without awkwardness. "Appreciate it," Cole said. She went inside and came back with 2 mugs and handed one down to Desmond and one to Cole. Cole took his and drank and looked at the yard and the fields beyond the flat Tennessee landscape, opening up to the east in the morning light, and thought about how to move from this point forward without making a mistake he couldn't take back. The little girl had come down the porch steps at some point while Cole and Desmond were working and was now standing close to the motorcycle examining it from a careful distance with her arms clasped behind her back in the posture of someone observing museum rules about not touching the exhibits. "It's okay," Cole said. "You can touch it." She looked at him with a direct, solemn gaze he was already beginning to recognize as characteristic of her, the look that seemed to ask whether the permission was real before she committed to accepting it. Then she reached out and touched the chrome of the handlebars with two careful fingers, light as a question. "It's cold," she said. "It warms up," Cole said. She looked at him again, the same measuring look. "You look like a bear," she said, "a big grumpy bear." Cole said nothing. She appeared to give the matter further consideration. "But bears keep you safe," she added. The tone was entirely matter-of-fact, the way children state things they have simply observed to be true. "So I'm going to call you Big Bear." Something moved through Cole's chest, some current he hadn't felt in a long time, complicated and unwelcome and entirely outside his control. He looked at this small girl in her star-covered pajamas with her two careful fingers on his motorcycle's chrome, and she looked back at him with absolute confidence that the name was accurate, and he did not trust himself to say anything at all for a moment. "Okay," he said finally. She nodded, satisfied. The matter was settled. They had lunch together, which Cole had not planned and Nora had clearly not intended, but which happened anyway, the way things happen when circumstances accumulate past the point of easy redirection. Cole fixed the fence section Desmond had mentioned and helped with the water pump, and when Nora brought sandwiches out to the yard at noon, the distance between all of them had changed in the way distance changes when people have spent several hours in proximity to one another doing ordinary things. The little girl ate her sandwich with concentration and asked Cole questions between bites with the unself-conscious directness of a child who had not yet learned that questions could be inappropriate. She asked him how fast the motorcycle went and whether he rode it in the rain and whether bears were afraid of motorcycles. She told him about the butterflies she had seen that morning in the field behind the barn. Yellow ones, she said, 3 of them. She told him about her collection of things in a shoebox at the other place. The place before this one, a blue marble and a leaf and a pink ribbon, and she said she wondered if anyone had thrown them away, and her voice was very even when she said it, the same even voice she used to describe the butterflies. Cole listened. It was Nora who broke, not Cole. She set her half-eaten sandwich down on the paper plate and looked at the table and pressed her lips together, and the effort of keeping her face composed was visible from 10 feet away. "Nobody threw them away," she said. Her voice was quiet and very careful. "Things like that don't get thrown away." The little girl looked at her. "How do you know it?" she asked. Genuine question, no accusation in it. Nora had no answer that she could say out loud. That evening, after Lily had gone to explore the far end of the yard with a stick and the focused energy of a child conducting a private expedition, Nora sat on the porch in the old rocking chair, and Cole sat on the step below her, and they were quiet for a while in the way people are quiet when they are each aware that the other is thinking about the same thing. "She makes you think of someone," Cole said. He had not intended to say it. It came out because it was true, and because Nora's face in the presence of Lily had been an open book from the moment he arrived, and because saying it felt like the only way into the real conversation. Nora looked at him for a moment. Then she looked out at the yard where Lily was crouching near the fence, examining something in the grass with total absorption. "Her name was Amy," Nora said. Her voice was very quiet. 8 months ago, leukemia." She paused. She was 4. Cole did not say he was sorry. He had been told he was sorry enough times after Katie that he understood the words were a formality, a thing people said because the alternative was silence, and silence was harder to offer. He just nodded. "She was like that," Nora said, watching Lily in the yard. That way of looking at things, like everything was interesting enough to deserve all of her attention. Cole was quiet. "I wake up sometimes," Nora said, "and for just a second I don't remember. And then I do." She stopped, started again. 8 months and I still do it every morning. Cole understood this. He had done it for 2 years after Katie. The 2 seconds of ordinary consciousness before memory arrived, and then the arriving. He had come to dread falling asleep because sleep meant the 2 seconds, and the 2 seconds meant the arriving every single morning, never getting easier. "I know what that is," Cole said. Nora looked at him. He had not meant to say that either. "I had a daughter," he said. He had not said those words aloud in longer than he could easily calculate. 20 years ago, her name was Katie. She was 5. He stopped. He was not going to say the rest of it, the full truth of the rest of it. Not here, not now. She died. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said. Cole nodded. They sat in silence and watched Lily in the yard, who had found something of absorbing interest near the fence post and was examining it with both hands now, crouching low to get a better angle. That night after Lily was in bed, Cole stayed in the yard while Desmond checked the shed roof. He could see into the kitchen window from where he sat on the tailgate of an old truck parked near the barn. He was not hiding. He was just sitting in the place he had found to sit, and the kitchen was lit and visible from that place. What he saw was Desmond standing at the kitchen table with a road atlas open in front of him. His finger was tracing a route. His body language was different from everything Cole had observed during the day, faster, less settled, with the barely contained energy of a person who had been thinking about something for a long time and was beginning to move toward it. On the chair beside the table was a canvas bag half-packed. Cole sat on the tailgate and looked at this for a moment. Then he got up and walked into the kitchen through the back door. Desmond spun around his hand going to the counter behind him. When he saw it was Cole, the alarm in his face did not entirely resolve into relief. "What the hell?" Desmond said. "You're packing a bag," Cole said. Desmond looked at the atlas and the bag and then back at Cole, and the calculation happening behind his eyes was visible and rapid. Cole could see him deciding whether to deny it, whether to order Cole off the property, whether to reach for whatever was on the counter behind him. Cole stood still in the kitchen doorway and looked at him with the calm, patient look of a man who is prepared to wait out any of those options. Desmond's hand came away from the counter. He sat down heavily in the kitchen chair. "Montana," Cole said, "or somewhere like it." "How long have you known," Desmond asked, "about the bag since 30 seconds ago?" Cole moved to the other chair and sat down without being invited. "About the rest of it since I watched you take her off the sidewalk yesterday afternoon." The silence that followed this was a different kind of silence than any of the silences that had come before it. Desmond sat in it for a long time with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the atlas. "You haven't called the police?" Desmond said finally. "No." "Why?" Cole thought about how to answer this. "Because I've been trying to understand what I'm actually dealing with," he said, "before I decide what to do about it." Desmond looked up at him. His face had the raw, exposed quality of a man who has been keeping something contained for a long time and has just understood that containing it is no longer possible. "She's better off," Desmond said. "You've seen it. You've been here all day. You saw how she is with Nora. You heard what she said about the other place." "I did," Cole said. "So you know." "I know she seems happy," Cole said. "I know Nora is taking care of her. I know what I saw." He paused. "I also know you drove a van to a sidewalk and took a 5-year-old girl by force because you needed money and got the wrong address." Desmond flinched. "That's what happened," Cole said. Not accusatory, just the plain shape of the fact. "Yes," Desmond said. "And now you're looking at a road atlas because you're thinking that if you move far enough and fast enough, you can make it into something else." Desmond said nothing. "I ran for 20 years, Cole said, after something I did, something I cannot undo." He looked at the atlas on the table. "You know what I found at the end of the road? The exact same thing I left behind, just an older. Just further from the possibility of being fixed." Desmond put his hands over his face. He sat like that for a moment. When he lowered them, his eyes were red. "We were going to lose the house," he said, "the medical bills, 3 different loan companies. I'd been out of work for 4 months. Nora wasn't sleeping. She was setting the table for 3. He stopped. "I thought if I could just get one thing to go right, we could get out from under it and start over, and maybe Nora could sleep again." "And then you got the wrong girl," Cole said. "And then we got Lily." Desmond's voice changed on her name, the same way Nora's had changed. "And she told us about the foster homes the first night. She just told us like it was normal, like she was describing the weather. And Nora," he stopped. "Nora held her while she went to sleep that night, and I heard her in there, and I thought, there it is, there's the thing I was trying to get. Except it costs too much, and it's the wrong thing, and there's no version of this that ends without someone getting destroyed." Cole was quiet for a while. "What happens if you go to Montana?" he said. "A year from now? 2 years. She needs school. She needs a doctor. She needs paperwork that doesn't exist. You're not starting over, you're just adding layers to a lie that is going to require more lying every single year." Desmond stared at the table. "And Nora," Cole said. "You think Nora gets better running? Or do you think she gets more fragile, more afraid, more dependent on a situation that has no floor under it?" The back door opened and Nora came in from the porch. She took in the scene, the atlas. The bag, Cole at the table, Desmond's face. She stood in the doorway. "He knows," Desmond said. Nora looked at Cole. Her face was very still. "He's not wrong," Cole said to her. "About Lily being better here than where she was. I saw the foster home. I understand why you did what you did." He let that sit for a moment. "But the situation you've put her in doesn't have a future, and she deserves a future." Nora crossed the kitchen and sat down in the third chair and folded her hands on the table. She looked like a woman who had been bracing for something and had finally felt it arrive. "What are you suggesting?" she said. "You turn yourselves in," Cole said, "voluntarily, with a lawyer present. You tell your story the way it actually happened, the debt losing Amy, the wrong address, all of it. You show the court who you are and what happened to you and why you made a terrible choice." He paused. "You don't run, you don't compound it, you face it." "And Lily?" Nora asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll make sure she's okay," Cole said. "I'll make sure she doesn't go back to where she came from." "How can you promise that?" Nora said. "You're a stranger." Cole thought about this. The honest answer was that he could not make that promise with any certainty, that he had a business card in his wallet and an idea and a woman named Dot Reeves who had told him to start with what the child needed. That was the totality of what he had. "I can't promise the outcome," he said. "I can promise I won't stop until she's somewhere safe. That's the only kind of promise I know how to keep." Nora looked at him for a long time. She looked at him the way Lily had looked at him when she decided to call him Big Bear, with the particular quality of attention that seeks the thing behind the surface. "You lost someone," she said. "A child." Cole said yes. "And you've been alone with it." Cole said yes. She nodded as if this explained something she had been trying to place. The 3 of them sat around the kitchen table in the old farmhouse in the quiet of the Tennessee night, with the atlas open between them and the bag on the chair and the weight of what needed to happen next pressing down equally on all of them. Outside, the fields were dark and still. Somewhere in the woodlot to the west, the owl called again. "Okay," Desmond said finally. He looked at Nora and she looked at him. "We'll do it your way." They talked through the plan for another hour. Cole explained what he knew about voluntary surrender and its legal implications. He was not a lawyer. He was not certain about any of it. But he had known enough men who had made legal decisions badly to know the shape of the better choices. The lawyer first, then a social worker who could meet Lily gently before anything official happened. Then the surrender with counsel present. The order mattered. The order was the difference between a situation that could be managed in a situation that couldn't. When Cole finally went outside, Desmond had carried the canvas bag back to the bedroom. The road atlas was folded and put away in a drawer. The kitchen light went off behind him as he walked across the dark yard to the barn, and the farmhouse settled into silence, and the fields stretched out around him in every direction under a sky thick with stars. He lay down on the old cot in the corner of the barn and looked up at the rafters and listened to the sounds of the night giving way to early morning, the birds beginning their first tentative notes, the shift in the air that came just before light. He thought about what he had said to Desmond. 20 years of running. He had meant it as counsel. He had meant it as the thing he knew to be true from experience. But saying it out loud in that kitchen had done something to him, put it outside himself in a way that made it visible differently. 20 years of running. And at the end of the road, the same thing he had left behind. Just older, just further from the possibility of being fixed. He was not running now. He was here in a barn in rural Tennessee, in the middle of a situation that was none of his business and entirely his business, and he had not moved away from it. He was moving toward it. He closed his eyes, and the darkness behind them was quiet for the first time and longer than he could remember. And he lay in it without trying to outrun it until sleep finally came and took him under, and the barn filled with morning light around his sleeping form. And somewhere in the farmhouse, a little girl woke up and padded down the hall and called out for someone, and the sound of her voice carried through the thin walls and across the yard and into the barn where Cole Mercer slept, and it sounded like something he had been trying to remember for a long time. Morning came to the farmhouse with the smell of pancakes and the sound of Lily's voice explaining something very seriously to her stuffed rabbit. Cole woke on the barn cot and lay still for a moment, orienting himself, and then rose and walked across the dew-wet yard to the house where Desmond was already at the stove, and Nora was helping Lily climb onto the chair that had become hers. They ate breakfast together. Lily showed Cole a drawing she had made the previous evening, yellow butterflies on a green background, carefully executed, each butterfly slightly different from the others, as if she had been studying the variations. Cole said it was good because it was. She accepted the compliment with a grave nod of a professional receiving accurate feedback. After breakfast, Cole excused himself and walked out to the far edge of the yard where the cell signal was slightly stronger and dialed the number on Dot's business card. The lawyer's name was Griffin. He answered on the second ring, which told Cole something about the kind of practice he ran. Cole explained the situation in brief factual terms, leaving nothing essential out. Griffin listened without interrupting, which told Cole something else. When Cole finished, there was a pause. "This is a complicated set of circumstances," Griffin said. "I know. The voluntary surrender aspect helps significantly, but the timeline matters. If you can get them in before anything escalates on the law enforcement side, the discretionary space available to the DA is considerably wider." "How do we start?" Griffin walked him through it. The sequence, the documentation, the psychological evaluation that Nora would almost certainly need, and that presented correctly could work in her favor rather than against her. Cole listened and asked specific questions and wrote nothing down because he had nowhere to write, and his memory, sharpened by decades of situations where writing things down was inadvisable, was adequate to the task. "One more thing," Cole said at the end. "The child. She needs to be placed somewhere decent, not back where she was." "That's a separate proceeding," Griffin said. "I understand that. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what the full scope of this is." Another pause. "Are you considering a guardianship petition?" Cole had not said this aloud to anyone yet. He had barely said it to himself. "I'm considering my option," he said. "I'll need to know your full situation," Griffin said. "Criminal history, current residence, employment." "I know," Cole said. "One step at a time." He hung up and stood in the yard for a moment with the phone in his hand and the morning sun on his face and the sound of Lily's voice drifting from the kitchen window. Then he went back inside to tell Desmond and Nora what came next. The rest of the morning moved with the careful, deliberate pace of people executing a plan they have committed to, but have not yet fully accepted. Desmond and Nora packed a bag for Lily, her few clothes, the stuffed rabbit, the crayons. They packed their own things with the minimal precision of people who understood that what they were packing for was not a trip. Cole sat at the kitchen table and worked through the sequence in his mind, checking for gaps. Lily moved through the house in her ordinary way, unaware of what was being prepared around her. She finished her drawing from the morning, a second sheet this time, and brought it to Cole at the table with the focused air of someone delivering something important. It was a crayon drawing on a sheet of white paper. 4 figures in a row, a large one in black with a circle that Cole understood was meant to be the Harley, a taller one with dark lines for hair, a shorter one beside it, and in the middle, smaller than all of them, a figure with yellow around it like sunshine. Below the figures, in the effortful block letters of a child who had learned them recently and was still making friends with the shape's 4 words. My family. Cole held the piece of paper and looked at it for a long time. The misspelling undid him more than the correct version would have. Something about the honest imperfection of it, the way the word was wrong, but the meaning behind it was entirely and devastatingly right. This was what she had been doing with her crayons and her concentration and her total serious attention to the work of it, while the adults in the house were discussing how to dismantle the only arrangement she had apparently decided to call a family. His hand was not entirely steady when he set the paper down on the table. It's us, Lily said, watching his face. That's Big Bear. She pointed at the large figure in black. And that's Mommy and Daddy, and that's me, Timmy. Cole looked at Desmond across the table. Desmond looked back at him with an expression that contained everything and said nothing. It's real good, Cole said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Lily nodded, satisfied with this assessment. She picked up her crayon and went back to adding details to the figures, a hat on the large black, 1 flowers at the feet of the small one in the middle. Cole excused himself and went outside again. He stood behind the barn in the space where no window overlooked him, and he stood there for a while with his hands at his side and his eyes on the middle distance, and he did not move until he was certain he had himself in hand again. He went back in. They were ready by mid-morning, or as ready as people can be for what they were preparing for. Cole called Griffin again and gave him the timeline. Griffin said he would make the necessary calls and that Cole should bring them to his office rather than directly to the police, that the presence of counsel from the first moment was not optional. Cole told Desmond and Nora this. They both nodded. Nora had been very quiet for the past hour, moving through the house in the way people move when they are memorizing a space they expect to leave. She paused at the kitchen threshold and looked at the table and the crayons and the pieces of paper, and then she picked up Lily's drawing, the My Family one, and held it for a moment before setting it carefully on the kitchen counter, face up in a place where it would be seen. Cole noticed this and said nothing. Ready, he said. No, Nora said, but yes. What happened next happened fast, the way events accelerate when the variables that have been held in suspension by human decision suddenly escape the control of the people who were holding them. Cole was walking to the Harley to lead them to Griffin's office when he heard it. Far away at first, the sound could have been anything. A truck on the county road, farm equipment in a distant field. But Cole had grown up around certain sounds, and he knew them the way other men knew bird song or weather by shape and implication. And the shape of this sound was wrong for trucks or farm equipment. He stopped walking. The sound was coming from the dirt road. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, and underneath the engine noise, faint but unmistakable, rising as the distance closed, the specific wail of sirens. He understood immediately. A neighbor. Someone in one of the scattered properties along the county road who had seen the van arrive 2 days ago, or seen Lily in the yard, or seen something that had connected with the missing child poster that the foster family had apparently filed after all the report Cole had missed in his searches because it had been filed in a different county database from the one he had checked. It did not matter how. It was happening. Cole was through the front door before the sound fully registered in his conscious mind, moving on the instinct of a man who has learned that the time between understanding a situation and acting on it is the only margin that matters. "We need to go out now," he said. "All of us. Hands up, slowly. I talk first." Desmond was on his feet immediately. Nora crossed the room and scooped Lily into her arms. Lily pressed her face against Nora's shoulder, sensing the change in the air, the way children sense changes before they can name them. "What's that noise?" Lily asked. "It's okay, sweetheart," Nora said. The words came out automatically, the reflex of a mother. Whether they were true was a different question. Cole moved to the front window and looked out. The dust was visible before the vehicles were a long, rising plume coming down the dirt road from the county road junction. He counted the shapes behind the dust. 4 patrol cars and something else larger white moving at the rear. He had perhaps 40 seconds. "Listen to me," Cole said. He kept his voice level and clear, the tone that cut through panic without feeding it. "When they come in, we go out. Hands up, no sudden movements, no arguments. We tell them who we are and that we were in the process of arranging a voluntary surrender. The lawyer's number is in my phone. His name is Griffin. You ask for him the moment they separate us." Desmond said nothing. His eyes were moving between Cole and the window and Lily in the back door. Cole saw the calculation happening and recognized it from the inside. The animal arithmetic of a cornered man running the options at speed. The back door, the fields, the tree line. "Desmond," Cole said. Desmond looked at him. "Don't," Cole said. The patrol cars came into the yard with their lights going, pulling up in a rough arc across the front of the farmhouse doors, opening before the vehicles had fully stopped. Officers came out moving fast, weapons drawn, taking cover behind the car doors, the aggressive choreography of a unit that had been told they were approaching an active child abduction. Cole opened the front door and stepped onto the porch with both hands raised above his head. "On the ground," the nearest officer shouted. "On the ground now." Cole went to his knees on the porch boards, lacing his fingers behind his head. "My name is Cole Mercer," he said, clearly loud enough to carry over the noise of the arriving vehicles. "I am not one of the people who took the child. I have been on this property attempting to organize a peaceful surrender. There is a 5-year-old girl inside. She is unharmed. The adults are going to come out peacefully." 2 officers came up the porch steps fast. One covered while the other pulled Cole's hands down behind his back, and the handcuffs went on with the mechanical efficiency of long practice. "The girl," Cole said as they hauled him upright, "she is going to be frightened. She doesn't understand what is happening. Please keep your weapons." "Save it," the officer behind him said. They moved him down the porch steps and toward the nearest patrol car, and Cole went without resistance because resistance was not a tool available to him in this moment, and he understood that. What he needed now was not force. What he needed was the kind of credibility he could not establish at gunpoint in the first 60 seconds of a police raid. Behind him, he heard the front door open again. Nora came out with Lily in her arms. Lily was pressed against Nora's shoulder, with both arms locked around her neck. Her face turned outward toward the yard, taking in the police cars and the officers and the lights with eyes wide and bewildered. She was not crying yet. She was in the stage, before crying the stage of trying to understand what she was seeing well enough to know how afraid to be. Then her eyes found Cole. "Big Bear," she said. The 2 female officers approaching Nora stopped moving for a fraction of a second, which was how long it took to process the image of a kidnapped child calling out to a handcuffed Hell's Angel by a name that was clearly affectionate. "Put the child down and step away from her," the lead officer said to Nora. Her voice was professional and firm and allowed for no interpretation. Nora's arms tightened around Lily. "Please," Nora said. Her voice was not firm. It was the voice of a woman standing on the last inch of ground available to her. "Please don't frighten her. Let me explain. We were going to turn ourselves in. We had a lawyer. Ask him." She was looking at Cole when she said this last part, her eyes doing the work her words could not. "Ma'am, put the child down." Lily looked between the officers and Nora and Cole across the yard, processing the geometry of the situation with the rapid intelligence Cole had come to recognize in her. She understood faster than the adults expected her to. The guns, the uniforms, the way the adults around her were holding their bodies, the handcuffs on Cole's wrists. "Big Bear," she said again, louder this time, and now the first note of panic was entering her voice, the high, clear frequency of a child's fear that cut through everything else in the yard. Cole turned toward her as much as the officer behind him would allow. "It's okay," he called across the distance. He put everything he had into keeping his voice steady and warm. "It's okay, baby girl. I'm right here." Big Bear. She was reaching toward him now, one arm out, her hand open. The rabbit fell from her grip and landed in the dirt of the yard. "Big Bear, come here." "I can't come right now," Cole said, "but I'm going to find you. Do you hear me? I'm going to find you." The officer behind him said something sharp and pulled him toward the patrol car. Cole kept his eyes on Lily as long as he could. The second female officer had taken Lily from Nora's arms, not roughly, but with the irreversible firmness of institutional procedure, and Lily was fighting the way small children fight without strategy, with the pure physical desperation of a body that does not understand why the thing it is reaching for keeps getting farther away. "Mommy!" Lily screamed. She was reaching for Nora now, who had dropped to her knees in the dirt with her hands over her mouth. "Mommy, Mommy!" From the far side of the house came shouting another officer's voice, and Cole understood without seeing it that Desmond had run. He had seen the calculation in Desmond's eyes, and he had told him don't, and Desmond had done it anyway because fear is faster than reason in men who have been afraid for a long time. Cole was put into the back of the patrol car. Through the window, he watched the social worker from the white vehicle, a woman in a gray blazer carrying a clipboard, take Lily from the officer and move toward the white car. Lily's face was visible over the woman's shoulders, streaked with tears, mouth open. She was still calling his name. He could not hear it through the glass, but he could see the shape of it on her lips, the two syllables, the name she had given him in the yard 2 mornings ago, with 2 careful fingers on cold chrome. The social worker put her in the white car. The door closed. Cole sat with his hands cuffed behind him and his back against the hard plastic seat and watched the white car's brake lights come on as it turned in the yard and pointed itself back toward the county road. He watched it until it disappeared behind the tree line. He had promised her. The patrol car began to move. Cole sat in the back and looked out the window at the flat Tennessee fields moving past him in the morning light and thought about the drawing on the kitchen counter. "My family. Face up where it would be seen." The word wrong, but the meaning entirely right. In the way that the most important things are often expressed imperfectly by the people who understand them most completely. He was very still in the back of the car, not the stillness of acceptance, the stillness of a man organizing himself around the only thing left available to organize himself around. He was going to need the lawyer. He was going to need Dot. He was going to need whatever credibility he could build from this position in whatever time he had. He was going to need to be calmer and more patient and more strategic than he had ever been in his life. He thought, start now. The holding cell in the Clarksville police station was exactly like every other holding cell Cole had been in. Concrete block walls painted a green that had been institutional before it had been applied. Fluorescent light that made everything look slightly less alive than it was. A metal bench bolted to the wall, and a drain in the floor, and a door with a narrow window of reinforced glass. They had taken his vest, his belt, his wallet, his phone. They had left him his thoughts, which were not a comfort. He sat on the metal bench and looked at the drain in the floor and went back through everything that had happened, not searching for the mistake, because the mistakes were apparent, but searching for the thread that was still intact. The lawyer's voicemail. He had spoken to Griffin that morning, and Griffin had said he would make the necessary calls. Whether the phone was in an evidence bag or in a locked drawer, Griffin knew what was happening, and would have initiated the process of finding out why his client had not arrived. Dot herself. Dot knew where he had been going. Dot had her notebook and whatever she had observed over the past 2 days, and the specific, unshakable confidence of a woman who had decided what she thought and was not easily moved from it. The drawing on the kitchen counter. Whatever the police had collected from the farmhouse was now part of a record, and records could be read by people who knew how to read them. He thought about Desmond running across the field, caught by now certainly, sitting in a cell somewhere in this same building. Desmond had been afraid and the fear had made him run, and the running had made everything worse. But the running was also a data point about the state of mind of a man who had not been thinking clearly for 8 months, and data points presented correctly could shift the picture. Cole sat in the cell and built the case piece by piece, the way he had once rebuilt engines, working from the outside edges, inward, finding the logic of the system, following it toward the source. He did not sleep. Around 3 in the morning, he reached the part he had been avoiding. The part about what happened after, assuming the case was made. Assuming Dot and Griffin and Desmond and Nora's truth combined to establish what he had actually been doing at that farmhouse. Assuming he was cleared of the kidnapping charge and released. What happened to Lily then? She would be in a system that had put her in 3 foster homes in 1 year. A system in which a child could spend a night outside because no one remembered to unlock the door. And this would be recounted later by that child in the same voice she used to describe the weather. A system that would give, in the absence of immediate family place, her somewhere with space available, which might be 100 miles from here, and might be no better than what she had come from. He thought about the business card in his wallet behind the photograph of Katie. He thought about what Dot had said. Start with what the child needs. He thought about Lily's face in the window of the white car. He sat on the metal bench in the holding cell, and the thing he had been holding back for many years came forward all at once without warning, without any of the usual signs that it was coming. He had kept it at distance with movement and noise and the specific consuming busyness of a life organized around not being still. Stillness was the danger. He had always known this. Stillness let the thing catch up. He was entirely still now, in a concrete room with no exits, and the thing caught up. He put his face in his hands and he cried. Not the way men cry when they are performing grief for an audience. The other way, the way that has no dignity and no shape, and no concern for what it looks like, the way that comes up from somewhere below the chest, below the ribs, from wherever it is that things are stored when you have spent years telling yourself you are fine. He cried for Katie, for the 10 minutes, for the July evening and the beers and the careless confidence of a man who told himself he was fine. He cried for Patricia, who had laughed easily and deserved better. He cried for all the years of riding away from things instead of toward them, all the years of a life organized around the avoidance of feeling, and all the things that had not happened in those years and would not now ever happen. And he cried for Lily, who had put 2 careful fingers on the chrome of his motorcycle and decided he looked like a bear and was therefore safe, and who had drawn him into a family portrait with a crayon on a piece of white paper, and who had looked at him through the window of a white car with her mouth shaping his name as it drove her away from him. He cried until he was empty, and then he sat in the quiet of the empty with his elbows on his knees and his face wet and the fluorescent light buzzing steadily above him, and he stayed in that quiet for a long time. Then he straightened up. He was 52 years old. He was a convicted felon. He was a Hell's Angel with a record and no fixed address and no obvious qualifications for what he was about to attempt. He understood all of this. He was also the only person who had come back. The morning brought a guard and a walk down a hallway, in a different room, a proper interview room with a table bolted to the floor, and 2 chairs and a recording device in the corner. The detective who came in was younger than Cole had expected, mid-40s, with the careful, watchful eyes of a man who had learned not to arrive at conclusions before the evidence did. His name was Braddock. He sat across the table from Cole and opened a file and looked at it for a moment before looking at Cole. "You want to tell me what you were doing in at that farmhouse," Braddock said. Yes, Cole said. I do. He told it straight through. From the sidewalk to the U-turn, to the nights in the yard, to the kitchen conversation, to the plan that had not had time to be executed. He left nothing out. He told it without editorializing and without defending himself, because the facts were his defense, and editorializing would only cloud them. Braddock listened without interrupting. He made notes. When Cole finished, Braddock sat back in his chair. You expect me to believe, Braddock said, that a Hell's Angel followed a kidnapping vehicle, observed the situation for 2 nights, talked the perpetrators into agreeing to voluntary surrender, called a family lawyer, and was in the process of executing a plan when we arrived. Yes, Cole said, that is a remarkable story. It is, Cole agreed. It also happens to be true. The door opened. A uniformed officer leaned in and said something to Braddock quietly. Braddock stood and went out. Cole sat at the table and waited. The wait was 40 minutes. When the door opened again, Braddock came back in, and behind him, carrying a large purse and wearing a floral dress and looking entirely unimpressed by her surroundings, was Dot Reeves. She sat down across from Cole and looked at him the way she had looked at him in the diner, with a direct, appraising gaze that saw the thing behind the surface. You look terrible, she said. I've had a long night, Cole said. I imagine you have. She opened her purse and produced a small spiral notebook. I wrote down our conversations, she said, sliding it across to Braddock, who had taken the chair at the end of the table. Dates, time, substance. He asked me about family law resources for children in irregular custody situations 3 days ago, before any of this happened. She produced her phone. My security camera covers the parking lot. I have footage of him making calls outside the diner. The timestamps match what he told me. Braddock looked at the notebook. He looked at the phone. My nephew is a family lawyer, Dot said pleasantly. He received a voicemail from Mr. Mercer yesterday morning asking for guidance on a voluntary surrender proceeding. The voicemail was timestamped at 7:42. Your officers arrived at the property at approximately 8:15. She folded her hands on the table. I trust the timeline is instructive. Braddock looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. Dot had covered it. They kept him another 6 hours. He understood this was procedural. He sat in the holding cell and worked through the next steps in his mind, and when they finally returned his belongings and walked him through a side door into the afternoon sun, he stood on the sidewalk and looked at the business card for a moment before he dialed. Griffin answered on the second ring. They talked for 20 minutes. At the end of it, Griffin said, You understand this is not a simple proceeding. I know, Cole said. Your record, your affiliations, no established residence, no prior relationship with the child. You're going to face significant skepticism. I know that too. A pause. What's your connection to this child? Cole thought about the drawing, my family. He thought about 2 careful fingers on chrome and a serious 5-year-old voice delivering a verdict on what kind of creature he was. She named me, Cole said. That's my connection. Another pause, longer this time. Come to my office tomorrow morning, Griffin said. 8 o'clock. Bring whatever documentation you have. Cole hung up and stood on the sidewalk and tilted his face up to the afternoon sun for a moment, feeling the warmth of it on his skin. Then he went to find out what had happened to Desmond and Nora. What had happened was this. Desmond had been caught at the tree line, brought back, and was now facing charges that included kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and child endangerment. His bail had been set at a number he could not pay. He was in custody. Nora had been taken to a separate facility for a psychological evaluation, which Braddock told Cole had been requested by the DA after her initial statement, in which she had told the story of Amy so completely and with such evident psychological fragility that the evaluating officer had recommended the assessment before any charging decisions were made. Cole asked about Lily. Braddock's expression shifted into something more careful. She's an emergency placement, he said. Temporary guardian until a more permanent arrangement is made. When is that decision made? There's a review scheduled for Friday. I want to be at that review, Cole said. Braddock looked at him for a long moment. You have a lawyer. I have a meeting at 8 tomorrow morning. Something moved in Braddock's expression, the specific, reluctant shift of a man reconsidering an initial assessment. "I'll see what I can do about getting you on the schedule," he said finally. "No promises." Cole nodded. No promises was more than nothing. In the days that followed before the hearing, Cole did what needed to be done. He drove to Memphis and had a direct conversation with the chapter president about his situation, a conversation that resulted in his taking an indefinite leave of absence, and a handshake that was more complicated than it appeared. He found a small house for rent on the eastern edge of Clarksville, a two-bedroom with a yard that needed work and a porch that needed paint, and he signed the lease with the same deliberate purposefulness with which he had made every decision in the past week. He spent 3 days cleaning it and buying the minimum of furniture and making the smaller bedroom into something that might pass as a child's room, which mostly meant putting a lamp on the bedside table and buying a set of sheets with stars on them, because Lily had been wearing star pajamas the morning he met her, and it seemed like a reasonable thing to remember. He also, without particularly planning to, bought a small jar of yellow paint and painted one wall of the small bedroom yellow. He stood back and looked at it when he was done. It was the color of the butterflies she had seen in the field behind the farmhouse barn, the 3 yellow ones she had described with the same careful attention she brought to everything she found worth describing. He filed the paperwork for guardianship through Griffin's office. He submitted to the background check, in the home study, in the interview with the DCS caseworker, a woman named Haverford, who asked her questions with the trained neutrality of someone who had learned not to project expectations onto the answers. Cole answered every question directly and without ornamentation. When she asked him why he wanted to petition for guardianship of a child he had known for 4 days, he said what was true. He said because nobody else is going to. Haverford wrote something in her file. Her expression did not change. Cole could not tell if this was a point for him or against him, and decided that trying to read it was not a useful expenditure of mental energy. He appeared as a witness in the preliminary hearing for Desmond and Nora. He had not been asked to do this. Griffin had advised against it. Cole had explained his reasoning, and Griffin had listened, and then said that if Cole was determined to do it, they would do it correctly. Cole took the stand and told the truth about what he had observed in the farmhouse, the dinners, in the drawings, and the lullabies, and the woman who had been the most genuinely careful person in that house with the most fragile thing in it. He described Desmond crying alone in the kitchen. He described Nora holding Lily while she fell asleep. He said these things not to excuse what had been done, but to complete the picture of who had done it and why, because a complete picture was more useful to justice than an incomplete one. And he had come to believe that what had happened in that farmhouse deserved a complete picture, even when the complete picture was complicated. The DA, who had reviewed the psychological evaluation and the financial records, and the death certificate for Amy Whitfield, and who was not without experience in the territory where grief becomes crime, filed for reduced charges. Desmond's attorney negotiated a plea arrangement. Nora's evaluation supported the clinical picture Griffin had been building since the beginning. The family court hearing was on a Thursday morning in a room that was smaller and quieter than the courtrooms in television shows, with wood paneling and fluorescent light, and a judge named Hargrove, who wore reading glasses and had the unhurried manner of a woman who had sat in this chair long enough to have stopped being surprised by the variety of human situations that arrived in front of her. Griffin sat beside Cole. Across the room, a representative from the Department of Children's Services sat with a thick file. There was no jury. There was no gallery. There was just the room and the people in it, and the question of what happened to one small girl who had ended up through a chain of events that no one had designed in the temporary custody of the state of Tennessee. The DCS representative spoke first. He laid out the situation plainly. Lily Brooks, age 5, currently in emergency foster placement. No biological family able or willing to assume custody. The previous foster placement had been found inadequate upon review, a finding that reflected the investigation Cole's case had inadvertently triggered into the conditions at the house on Maple Street. The current petitioner for guardianship had a prior felony conviction, active membership in an outlaw motorcycle club, currently on administrative leave, no established permanent residence prior to the current lease, and no prior relationship with the child beyond a period of approximately 4 days. It was a compelling case for denial, Griffin responded methodically. He submitted the documentation Cole had assembled. The lease. The letter from the chapter acknowledging the leave of absence. The character statement from Dot Reeves, which Griffin had told Cole, was the most persuasive piece of writing he had read in 15 years of family law, 3 pages of specific concrete observation from a woman whose judgment the town of Clarksville had trusted for 4 decades. The records of Cole's sobriety, 20 years of it, documented through a program he had attended quietly and without announcement. And the report from Haverford, the DCS caseworker, whose professional assessment had arrived at a conclusion that had surprised Cole when Griffin read it to him, that the petitioner demonstrated a genuine and non-performative understanding of the child's needs, and that the child herself had expressed in age-appropriate terms a preference for continued contact with the petitioner. She had asked for him. In the emergency placement in the days after the farmhouse, Lily had asked for Big Bear. The caseworker had written this down because caseworkers write things down, and the things she had written had become part of the record, and the record was now in this room. Then Griffin called Cole to speak. Cole had not prepared remarks. He had thought about preparing remarks and had decided against it because prepared remarks were a performance. And what this room required was not a performance. He sat where he was directed to sit, and he looked at Judge Hargrove, and he said what was true. He said, "I am not a good candidate on paper. I understand that. I have a record and a history, and I have spent the last 20 years building a life that was specifically designed to avoid exactly this kind of responsibility. I know all of that better than anyone in this room." He said, 20 years ago, I made a decision that cost 2 people their lives, my wife and my daughter. My daughter was 5 years old. I was the one driving. I have not had a drink since the night it happened, and I have not had a day since that night where I did not know exactly what I lost and exactly why I lost it. He said, I saw Lily on a sidewalk. I turned around. That is the whole story. I did not have a plan. I did not have a strategy. I turned around because I have spent 20 years not turning around, and I knew standing at that intersection that I was not going to be able to live with having not turned around one more time. He looked at Judge Hargrove. He said, she named me. She decided I was safe. She put her hand on my motorcycle and looked at me and decided, I don't know what she saw. I don't know that I deserve whatever she thought she saw, but I know I will spend the rest of my life making sure she was right. The room was quiet for a moment after he stopped speaking. Judge Hargrove looked at him over her reading glasses for a long time. Then she made a note. The proceedings took another 2 hours. There was discussion of supervision requirements of periodic DCS review of the terms under which the arrangement could be reconsidered. Cole agreed to everything. He had told Griffin before the hearing that he would agree to everything within reason and a fair amount outside it. At the end of it, Judge Hargrove removed her reading glasses and looked at the room. The court finds, she said, that the petitioner has demonstrated sufficient capacity, intent, and material preparation to serve as temporary guardian for the period of 6 months subject to monthly review. She looked at Cole directly. Mr. Mercer, the court is not unaware that this is an unconventional determination. It is made on the basis of the totality of evidence, including testimony, documentation, and the court's assessment of credibility. A pause. Do not give me reason to reconsider it. No, ma'am, Cole said. In the same week in a different courtroom, Desmond Whitfield received a suspended sentence of 3 years with mandatory psychological counseling and 200 hours of community service. Nora Whitfield, whose evaluation had confirmed the clinical diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder and whose cooperation with investigators had been complete and unambiguous, was remanded to a 12-month outpatient treatment program rather than a custodial sentence. Before they were separated to be processed through their respective arrangements, Nora asked the bailiff if she could have 1 minute. The bailiff looked at the judge. The judge nodded. Nora was brought to where Cole was standing in the hallway. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Her face had the cleaned-out quality of someone who has been through something that removed everything inessential. "Tell her," Nora said, "that the butterfly picture she drew is in my wallet. I asked them if I could keep it." She stopped. "Tell her we think about her." "I will," Cole said. Nora nodded. The bailiff moved them forward and the hallway absorbed them, and Cole stood where he was for a moment before walking toward the exit where Griffin was waiting with the paperwork. The DCS representative brought Lily in from the waiting area 20 minutes after the hearing concluded. Cole was standing near the window when the door opened. He had positioned himself there without thinking about it by the window, with the afternoon light coming through and the open visible, nothing between them. Griffin stood near the door. The DCS representative stood at the threshold. Lily came through the door in a yellow dress that someone had put on her clean and pressed her dark hair combed. She was holding the worn stuffed rabbit in both arms. She looked smaller than he remembered, or perhaps the room made her look smaller, all that institutional space around a child's frame. She stopped just inside the door and looked around the room. Her eyes moved past the DCS representative, past Griffin, past the table, and the chairs and the wood-paneled walls. They found Cole. For a moment, she just looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them moved. Then she came across the room at full speed, the rabbit trailing from one hand, and she hit him somewhere around the midsection with enough force that he took a step back, and her arms went around him, and she pressed her face against his chest, and he felt her shoulders shaking with the aftermath of something she had been holding for a week. Cole put his arms around her. He was not a man who had held a child in 20 years. The specific weight of it, the particular warmth and smallness of a child held against the chest, was something he had not allowed himself to remember, because remembering it was the sharpest part of the loss. He held it now. He held it and did not move away from it. "Big Bear came back," she said into his chest. Her voice was muffled and uneven and entirely certain. "I said I would," Cole said. She held on tighter. Cole stood in the middle of that quiet room with a 5-year-old girl, holding on to him with everything she had, and the afternoon light coming through the window, and Griffin making a quiet, discreet exit through the door, and he felt something that he did not have a precise word for. It was not happiness exactly. It was something older and more fundamental than happiness. It was the specific feeling of a man who has been carrying the wrong thing for a long time and has finally set it down and picked up the right thing instead. The house he had leased was small, 2-bedroom on a quiet street on the eastern edge of Clarksville, with a yard that needed work and a porch that needed paint and a kitchen that smelled like the previous tenant's cooking. Cole had spent 3 days cleaning it and making it into something that could be called ready, which in his estimation meant clean and functional and containing the minimum of the right things. Lily walked through the house on the first afternoon with the careful, appraising gaze he had come to recognize as her standard mode of taking in new environments, touching things lightly as she passed them, establishing the perimeter. She went through the kitchen and the small living room and the bathroom, and then she stood in the doorway of the yellow-walled bedroom for a long time without saying anything. "Is this mine?" she said finally. "It is," Cole said. She went in and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the yellow bundle. The afternoon sun was coming through the window at an angle that made the yellow glow warm and particular. "I had a shoebox," she said, "at the other place, the place before the place before." "I know," Cole said. He was standing in the doorway. "It had a blue marble," she said, "in a leaf and a pink ribbon." "We'll find a shoebox," Cole said. "We'll start a new one." She considered this. Then she nodded, the solemn, decisive nod of a child closing a negotiation. She bounced once on the bed, testing it. Then she picked up her rabbit and set it carefully against the pillow, positioning it with the precise attention she brought to all arrangements of the things she considered hers. She looked up at him with the direct, measuring gaze that had read him accurately from the first moment in the yard. "Big Bear," she said. "Yeah. Are you going to ride your motorcycle away?" Cole looked at her for a moment. At the 5-year-old, sitting on the edge of the bed in the yellow-walled room, with her rabbit against the pillow and her brown eyes asking the question, she actually needed answered the only question that mattered in the architecture of a child's world, which was whether the person in front of her was going to stay. No, he said. She looked at him for another moment, applying the evaluation she applied to everything. Then she seemed to accept the answer. Outside, the evening was coming in soft and golden, the light that comes at the end of a long day when the heat has passed and the air is beginning to cool. A car moved past at low speed. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor was cutting grass, the sound domestic and ordinary and entirely unhurried. Cole leaned against the door frame and watched Lily reach for a crayon from the small container he had put on the bedside table. She pulled a piece of paper toward her and began something new with the absorbed total concentration she brought to all work she considered important. He watched her work and did not ask what she was drawing. He would see it when it was done. He had learned that about her, that she would show him when she was ready, that her readiness was its own announcement, and that waiting for it was not a hardship but a privilege. A butterfly appeared outside the bedroom window, small and yellow, moving in the loose, unhurried way of something that has no destination and no objection to that. It drifted past the glass and disappeared into the yard beyond. Lily looked up. She had seen it. He could tell from the slight widening of her eyes, a small pause in the movement of her crayon, the particular quality of attention she gave to things she found worth noticing. Then she looked back down at her paper and kept drawing. Cole straightened from the door frame and walked through the house to the front porch and sat down on the step in the evening light. The street was quiet. The grass smell from down the block drifted over on a light breeze. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a screen door opened and closed. From inside the house came the occasional small sounds of Lily working, the scrape of a crayon, the rustle of paper. Once, very quietly, the sound of her talking to her rabbit in the instructional tone she used when explaining things that seemed obvious to her. The Harley sat in the driveway where he had left it. The chrome caught the last angle of the evening sun and held it in a long, bright line. Cole looked at it the way he always looked at it, taking in the familiar lines of it, the weight and form of the thing that had carried him through 20 years of roads that led nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Then he looked away from it. He looked at the quiet street, the ordinary houses, the evening settling in over the neighborhood. He looked at the light in the window of the small house behind him, warm and particular, the specific color of a room where someone is at work on something. He had told Desmond 20 years of running. He had meant it as counsel. He had meant it as the thing he knew to be true from experience. But saying it out loud had done something to him, put it outside himself in a way that made it visible differently. 20 years of running, and at the end of the road, the same thing he had left behind, just older, just further from the possibility of being fixed. He was not at the end of any road now. He was at the beginning of something without a name, yet something that had started on a sidewalk in the late afternoon when a little girl with brown eyes had looked at him through a closing van door, and he had made a U-turn at a red light because the alternative was unacceptable. From inside the house, Lily called his name. Not his name, the name she had given him, the one that was accurate. Cole stood up from the porch step and went inside. She was standing in the doorway of the yellow-walled bedroom, holding a piece of paper in both hands extended toward him. Her face had the expression of someone who has finished something they are satisfied with and is ready for the assessment. Cole took the paper. It was a new drawing. The yellow butterfly, recognizable by the careful attention she had given its wings. The house with the yellow-walled window visible. And in front of the house, two figures. A large one and a small one. Below the figures, in the effortful block letters of a child still learning the shapes, two words this time. Spelled correctly this time, as if she had been practicing, as if she had known this one needed to be right. We stayed. Cole looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at her. "It's real good," he said. She smiled the full and sudden smile of a child who has been understood and held out her hand for the drawing back. Cole gave it to her. She went to the bedside table and propped it carefully against the lamp, adjusting its position twice until it was exactly where she wanted it angled to catch the light. Then she climbed onto the bed and patted the space beside her with the matter-of-fact authority of someone making an arrangement that is entirely settled. Cole sat down on the edge of the bed. Lily leaned against him the way children lean against people they trust, with the full, unself-conscious weight of it, and picked up her rabbit and held it in her lap and looked at the yellow wall in the evening light. Cole looked at the yellow wall too. Outside, the last of the day was going gold, and then quiet, and the streets settled into the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, and somewhere down the block the lawnmower stopped, and the neighborhood was still, and the small house on the eastern edge of Clarksville held its light.